She turned away a guest without a second thought, assuming he couldn't afford to be there, only to learn he was the man who signed her paycheck. The automatic glass doors slid open, and Dwayne stepped inside the grand lobby of the Fairmont Regent Hotel in downtown Austin. It was one of his finest properties. Modern, sophisticated, every detail meticulously curated to exude exclusivity. The polished marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow, and the scent of fresh-cut orchids lingered in the air. He took a slow breath, absorbing the space. But this wasn't a visit to admire his empire. Tonight, he was just another guest. No board meetings, no VIP treatment, no one whispering his name in hushed tones. Just a man checking into a hotel. His hotel. Dwayne had booked the reservation under Lewis Henderson, a name with no weight, no recognition. He didn't want special treatment. He wanted the truth. A few feet ahead, the reception desk stretched across the room, sleek and pristine, its gold accents catching the light. A young couple stood near the concierge, laughing as they planned their evening. To the left, a group of businessmen clinked whiskey glasses at the bar, deep in conversation. Everything was running as it should be. Or so it seemed. Dwayne adjusted the strap of his leather duffel and approached the desk. Behind it, Hannah Whitmore sat, her manicured nails tapping against the keyboard. Early 30s, sharp bob haircut, an expression that teetered between exhaustion and mild irritation. Her uniform was crisp, her name tag slightly askew. She didn't look up. "Good evening," Dwayne said, voice calm, polite. Hannah exhaled through her nose like she'd been interrupted. Still typing. No acknowledgement, no glance in his direction. He waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. Dwayne cleared his throat. "I have a reservation. Name's Lewis Henderson." That got her attention. Hannah finally looked up, eyes flicking over him quickly, before settling into something unreadable. Dwayne was dressed simply. Dark jeans, tailored blazer, white button-up. Expensive, but not in an obvious way. Nothing about him screamed wealth or power. And for the first time in a long time, he could tell that mattered. Her expression barely shifted, but something in her demeanor did. "Are you sure?" she asked flatly. Dwayne's brow lifted slightly. "Pretty sure." She sighed, fingers moving over the keyboard as if this were a chore. One moment. Silence stretched between them as she typed, her lips pursed. A minute passed. Then another. "I don't see a reservation under that name," she said finally, looking at him like the issue was settled. Dwayne pulled out his phone. "I have a confirmation email." She barely glanced at it. Maybe there was a mistake in the system. "Could you double-check?" Her smile was tight. "Sir, this is a luxury hotel. Are you sure your reservation wasn't at one of our sister properties?" That was the moment, the tone. Dwayne had seen this before. He recognized it in the way her voice curled around luxury, like it didn't belong to him, like he didn't belong here. Calmly, he gestured toward the screen. "Would you mind searching again? The confirmation email is right here." Hannah's patience thinned. "I can't hold up the line all night, sir." Dwayne glanced behind him. There was no line. His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not asking for a favor, just for you to check." Her lips pressed into a thin line, another sigh. She went through the motions, fingers tapping louder now, movements exaggerated. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. Then she stopped typing. "Oh," she muttered under her breath. Dwayne already knew. There it was, his reservation, right where it should be. But Hannah didn't apologize. Instead, she reached for a keycard, sliding it across the counter with a forced smile. "Looks like I found it. Must have been a small glitch in the system." Dwayne held her gaze, searching for any sign of regret, any flicker of awareness. Nothing. Just dismissal wrapped in artificial politeness. He took the keycard but didn't move. Because this wasn't over. But before things escalated, someone else had noticed, and that was about to change everything. Dwayne didn't react right away. He just held the keycard between his fingers, rolling its smooth edge against his thumb. Hannah, already moving on, had turned her attention back to her screen, her nails tapping lightly against the desk as if the moment was over. But it wasn't. Not for him. A voice interrupted the silence. "Everything okay here?" Dwayne turned. A man in a neatly pressed navy suit stood a few feet away. Ethan Rogers, assistant front desk manager, a familiar face from previous visits, though Dwayne doubted Ethan recognized him now. He had a polite but cautious smile, the kind of expression reserved for diffusing potential complaints. Hannah spoke before Dwayne could. "This guest had some trouble finding his reservation," she said, her tone clipped. Dwayne's expression remained neutral. "Not exactly. My reservation was in the system. It just wasn't checked properly." Ethan's gaze flicked between them. Something in Dwayne's voice, calm, measured, made him pause. "Let me take a look." He stepped behind the counter, scanning the monitor. Hannah shifted slightly, arms crossing over her chest. "Oh," Ethan murmured after a second. His lips parted slightly, and Dwayne could see it, the recognition creeping in. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he straightened, clearing his throat. "Sir," he said carefully, "may I ask your full name?" Dwayne studied him, then exhaled through his nose. "Dwayne Caldwell." Ethan blinked. His entire posture changed, shoulders stiffening as realization struck. He knew the name, and suddenly Hannah's dismissiveness turned into a glaring mistake. There was a pause, a thick, heavy moment where the weight of what had just happened settled between them. Hannah frowned. "Wait, what?" She looked at Ethan, clearly confused. Ethan forced a tight-lipped smile, but Dwayne could see the sweat forming at his temple. "Mr. Caldwell is—" But before he could finish, Hannah scoffed. Actually scoffed. "I'm sorry, you're Dwayne Caldwell?" she said, half laughing. "The CEO of Caldwell Luxury Resorts?" Dwayne didn't answer. He didn't need to. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, Hannah, this is our Dwayne Caldwell." Silence. Realization dawned in pieces, slow and painful. Hannah's expression went from confused to stunned, to something dangerously close to panic. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Dwayne let it sit, let her feel the full weight of what had just transpired. He finally broke the silence. "I'm curious," he said, voice as smooth as ever. "At what point did you assume I didn't belong here?" Hannah's breath hitched. Sir, I wasn't. I mean, it was just—" Dwayne tilted his head slightly. "Was it when I walked in when I gave you my reservation? Or was it when you told me this was a luxury hotel?" Ethan inhaled sharply. He knew this was bad. Really bad. Hannah floundered. "That's not what I meant. I thought there was a mistake in the system." "There was no mistake in the system," Ethan cut in quickly, trying to salvage the situation. "It was a failure in service." He turned to Dwayne, his voice dripping with apology. "Mr. Caldwell, I am deeply sorry for this misunderstanding. I assure you, this is not how we train our staff." Dwayne arched a brow. "Then what do you train them to do?" Ethan swallowed. "Sir, Hannah was still frozen, her face pale. Dwayne exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You don't have to answer that," he said, slipping the keycard into his pocket. "Because I already know." But he wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about him, this was about something much bigger. The silence was suffocating. Hannah's face had drained of color, her usual air of detached confidence replaced by something fragile, something dangerously close to fear. Ethan stood beside her, hands clasped tightly in front of him, trying to steady himself as if the entire weight of the hotel's reputation balanced on this moment. Dwayne didn't rush. He let the quiet linger, let it sit the way discomfort should. Because this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just an off night or an accident. It was a pattern, one he was determined to expose. A movement caught his eye. Across the lobby, a housekeeper had stopped mid-step, her cart frozen beside her as she watched. Near the entrance, the valet pretended to check his phone, but was clearly listening. Even the bartender, Polishing a glass behind the sleek marble counter had slowed his movements, ears subtly tilted toward the front desk. People were paying attention. Good. Dwayne finally exhaled and turned his gaze to Ethan. "I have a question." Ethan straightened, desperate to regain some control. "Of course, sir." Dwayne nodded toward Hannah. "How long has she worked here?" Hannah flinched like she hadn't expected to be addressed directly. Ethan hesitated. 2 years, he answered carefully. Dwayne hummed. "And in those 2 years, how many guests has she treated the way she treated me?" Ethan's mouth opened, then shut. He had no answer, at least not one that wouldn't incriminate his own leadership. Dwayne turned back to Hannah. "You dismissed me before I even finished my sentence," he said, his tone even. "You assumed I couldn't afford to be here. You didn't even check my reservation until I asked twice. So I'll ask again. How many people have you turned away like this?" Hannah swallowed hard. I don't know." Dwayne studied her, unimpressed. "That's a convenient answer." Ethan stepped in hastily. "Mr. Caldwell, I want to personally apologize. This is unacceptable. I'll be having a very serious conversation with Hannah about—" Dwayne held up a hand. "You think this is just about her?" Ethan faltered. Dwayne let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "This isn't about one receptionist with bad judgment. It's about culture, the culture of this hotel, the culture of service. Because let's be honest, if I wasn't me, if I wasn't the CEO, she wouldn't be explaining herself right now." Ethan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Hannah looked down, her fingers twisting the hem of her blazer. Dwayne's voice softened slightly, but his words were no less sharp. "I built this company to be a place of excellence, a place where every guest is treated with dignity, not just the ones you assume belong here." Silence. Across the room, someone coughed. The housekeeper shifted her weight. The bartender set his glass down a little too hard. Ethan finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Caldwell, I promise you we will handle this internally. We'll make sure nothing like this happens again." Dwayne looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small, knowing smile. "You're right about one thing." Ethan blinked. "Sir?" Dwayne slid his hands into his pockets. "This won't happen again. But not for the reasons they thought." Because Dwayne wasn't interested in a simple apology. He had something else in mind, something much bigger. Ethan looked like he wanted to shrink into the floor. Hannah, still gripping the hem of her blazer, was barely breathing. Dwayne let the tension settle, not out of cruelty, but because moments like this had weight, and people only truly listened when they were forced to sit in their discomfort. "You said you'd handle this internally," Dwayne repeated, voice calm. "That sounds like a fancy way of saying you'll sweep it under the rug." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, Tell me something," Dwayne cut in. "What's the actual protocol when a guest is disrespected at check-in? Not a VIP, not a high-profile client, just any paying guest." Ethan hesitated. That pause told Dwayne everything. "There isn't one, is there?" Dwayne said, his voice quieter now, sharper. "You have a policy for handling late checkouts, a policy for lost luggage, a policy for room service complaints. But when a guest is made to feel like they don't belong, nothing." Ethan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Sir, we take guest experience very seriously." Dwayne chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, I see performances, not accountability." Hannah flinched. Dwayne sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I've spent years building this company, Ethan. Years." His voice was steady, but the weight behind it was undeniable. "I designed these hotels to be welcoming, to be luxurious, yes, but accessible. I wanted people to walk in and feel like they belonged. And yet, I walk into one of my own properties and get treated like I'm lost." Ethan opened his mouth, but Dwayne held up a hand. "I don't need another apology." His eyes flicked to Hannah. "I need change." Hannah finally looked up. She was bracing herself, ready to be fired on the spot, but that wasn't what Dwayne had in mind. "Tell me something, Hannah," he said, voice quieter now. "Do you know what it feels like to walk into a place and immediately know you're not welcome?" She blinked. The question caught her off guard. She fumbled for an answer. I didn't mean—" "I'm not asking what you meant," Dwayne interrupted. "I'm asking if you know what it feels like." She swallowed hard, then shook her head. "No, sir." Dwayne nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." A deep breath. Then he turned to Ethan. "I don't want her fired." Ethan looked stunned. "Sir?" "Firing her doesn't fix the problem," Dwayne said simply. "It just makes it disappear." Hannah was still frozen, eyes flicking between them. Dwayne continued, "Instead, I want something else. Training. And not just for Hannah, for every single employee in this hotel." Ethan frowned, clearly confused. "Training, sir?" "Yes. I want bias training rolled out immediately," Dwayne said. "I want every employee, from front desk to housekeeping, to sit in a room and learn what it means to serve people equally. I want scenarios. I want them to hear from guests who've been dismissed. I want them to understand how easy it is to make someone feel small, even in a hotel built for comfort." Ethan hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Absolutely. I'll get with HR." "Not just here." Dwayne's voice cut through like a knife. "Every single Caldwell luxury resort." Ethan's mouth snapped shut. Hannah's lips parted slightly, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Dwayne leaned forward slightly. "Because this isn't just about one receptionist. This is about the culture you've all allowed to take root." Silence. Dwayne straightened, adjusting the cuffs of his blazer. "I expect an implementation plan on my desk by next week." Ethan nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell." Dwayne glanced at Hannah one last time. She still looked shaken, but something in her posture had shifted. Less panic, more thought. "Learn from this," he said, voice quieter now. "Not because I'm your CEO, not because your job depends on it, but because you should want to be better." Hannah exhaled, nodding slightly. "Yes, sir." Dwayne didn't say anything else. He simply turned, slipping the key card from his pocket and heading toward the elevators. But this wasn't just about fixing one hotel. This was about changing an entire mindset, and he was just getting started. The elevator doors slid open, and Dwayne stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. As the doors began to close, he caught a glimpse of Hannah, still standing behind the desk, staring down at the counter. Her face wasn't just embarrassed, it was unsettled. Good. Change didn't happen in comfort. It happened in the moments people couldn't shake, the moments that sat heavy in their chest long after the world had moved on. As the elevator climbed, Dwayne leaned against the wall, rolling his shoulders to shake off the weight of the confrontation. He'd spent years perfecting the art of staying calm under pressure, but this wasn't just business. This was personal. He thought about the countless people who had been turned away from his hotels, not because they lacked a reservation, not because they were loud or rude, but because someone like Hannah had looked at them and made a quiet decision. "You don't belong here." That thought lingered longer than he wanted. The doors slid open to reveal the presidential suite, a space he had personally designed. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Austin skyline, casting the city in a sea of golden light. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and fresh linen. Everything was perfect. But Dwayne barely glanced at it. Instead, he walked straight to the minibar, grabbed a glass, and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. He let the silence settle before finally pulling out his phone. A text message notification blinked at the top of his screen, from his chief of operations, Renee Marshall. "Renee, heard what happened. Call me when you get a chance." Dwayne exhaled slowly, then tapped her name. She picked up after the first ring. "Tell me you didn't actually walk into that hotel unannounced," she said, skipping pleasantries. Dwayne smirked. "What, you worried about me?" "I'm worried about them," she shot back. "You just blew up their entire system, didn't you?" He took a sip of whiskey. "Something like that." Renee sighed, but there was a hint of approval in her voice. And they're rolling out bias training across every single Caldwell property, Dwayne said simply. Renee let out a low whistle. Took them long enough. Dwayne swirled the whiskey in his glass. Should have happened years ago. Renee was quiet for a moment. Then, what about the receptionist? Dwayne thought about it. Thought about Hannah, standing there with her perfectly pressed uniform and her uncomfortable silence. She's got a choice to make, he said finally. Renee hummed. You think she'll learn from it? Dwayne leaned back against the couch, letting his gaze drift to the skyline. I don't know. But he hoped so, because redemption wasn't about punishment. It was about opportunity. Hannah stood frozen behind the front desk, Ethan beside her, still reeling from what had just happened. The lobby had gone back to its usual rhythm, guests checking in, staff moving seamlessly. But inside her head, everything was chaos. She had humiliated the CEO of the company. Not just humiliated him, she had dismissed him, shut him down, assumed she knew him before he even finished speaking. And he didn't fire her. He could have, should have. Instead, he had looked her in the eye and asked a question she couldn't shake. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a place and immediately know you're not welcome? Her stomach twisted. She had never felt that. Not once. Hey. She turned. Ethan was watching her, expression too unreadable. You okay? He asked. Hannah opened her mouth, closed it, swallowed hard. I don't know. Ethan nodded slowly. Good. She frowned. Good? He shrugged. Means you're thinking about it. And for the first time, she was. But what she did next would determine whether this was just another mistake or a moment that actually changed something. Hannah barely slept that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the worst moment of her career. Every word, every look, every mistake. But the part that haunted her the most? Dwayne Caldwell hadn't yelled. He hadn't humiliated her. He hadn't fired her. Instead, he had asked a question she couldn't shake. Do you know what it feels like to walk into a place and immediately know you're not welcome? The answer had been no. But now she understood a fraction of what that might feel like. By morning, she had made a decision. She wasn't going to pretend it hadn't happened. Wasn't going to excuse herself with weak justifications. She was going to do something about it. Dwayne stood in the same hotel lobby, hands in his pockets, watching. The air felt different, not just because people knew who he was now, but because something had shifted. At the front desk, employees greeted every guest with actual warmth, not just robotic professionalism. Valets moved with purpose, holding open doors, smiling genuinely. There was an energy here that hadn't existed before. And then he saw her. Hannah. She was in uniform, standing at the check-in desk, but this time her posture wasn't stiff. It wasn't guarded. She was looking a guest in the eye, nodding as they spoke, listening. He didn't approach, just observed. And then, as if sensing his presence, she turned. Their eyes met. For a moment she hesitated. Then she squared her shoulders and walked toward him. Mr. Caldwell, she said carefully, stopping a few feet away. Dwayne studied her, waiting. She inhaled sharply. I owe you an apology. A real one. He tilted his head slightly. Go on. Hannah swallowed hard. I made assumptions about you, and probably about a lot of people before you. Her voice was quieter now. I thought I was just doing my job. But I wasn't treating people the same. And she exhaled. That's not who I want to be. Dwayne held her gaze, searching for any trace of performative regret. He didn't see it. Just truth. Finally, he nodded. Good. She blinked, like she had expected something more, something heavier. Dwayne let a small smirk play at the corner of his lips. Now prove it. Hannah exhaled, shoulders dropping slightly. I will. She turned to go, then hesitated. "We're having our first bias training next week," she said, glancing back. "I'll be in the front row." Dwayne raised an eyebrow. "Not in the back, pretending to take notes?" A breathy laugh escaped her. "No, front row." Dwayne nodded again, this time with something close to satisfaction. As she walked back to the desk, something settled in his chest. This wasn't about a single apology or a policy change. It was about the mindset, the culture, the long game. And if people like Hannah could change, then maybe, just maybe, this had been worth it. Because real impact isn't measured by words. It's measured by what happens next. Stories like this matter. They remind us how easy it is to judge, to assume, to dismiss. But they also remind us of something bigger, that people can change. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe for more. Let's keep these conversations going, because change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we listen, when we challenge, and when we do better.